Hey guys, it's Jan, also known as Bluster, and today we are going to build an MS chassis tuned class high-speed car. And these are going to be for sale at DXNProvisions.com, so please go ahead and check them out in the links in the video description down below. Now, on to the video. So we're going to start off with the parts. Item number 95234, MS chassis set. We're going to be using the purple. Next is the Kuroshiba kit 95588. We're going to focus mainly on the wheels. We need two kits so that we could actually get a decent amount of good wheels out of these kits. Sometimes they're not in good shape. Item number 15360, the gold-plated terminal set for MS. Next is the purple pinions 94577. We're going to be splitting these in between the two cars just for extras. Next is counter gear set 15349, the 3.521 for MS and MA. Next is the 72mm shafts, hollow. We're going to be using this for less weight, and these are going to be slightly straighter out of the package as well. Next is the Torque Tune 2 Motor Pro. These are pretty standard now for high speed. Next is the purple pinions. We're going to be using 94857 or 95555. Either one will work. Next is 15473. You're going to need two of these for the 1.5mm spacers. Next is the HG round hole ball bearing. You're going to need these for the axles. And then we're going to be using the low friction purple large arch diameter tires, and then we're going to be using the 95260 HG multi-roller setting stay 1.5. These are pretty good because you can move them closer to the chassis. 95113, the front multi-roller setting stay, doesn't matter as long as you're using that shape. 15347, the MS, you're going to need the 520 bearings and the shafts. Next is we're going to be using the 17mm plastic ring rollers 95349. Next is we're going to be using the purple HG lightweight 95539. These are going to be at the front with the 17mm rollers. These are going to be for the back 95385. These are quite old now, so these are going to be used for the rear for their speed. Next is we're going to be using two sets of the cap screws 15454. We're only going to be using the 30mm screws from this set. And the other variation is we're going to be using the red 17mm rollers. We're actually going to be splitting the parts between the two cars. So now we are going to be taking apart the packaging. Essentially, we're going to start assembling the purple MS chassis specifically for the two different cars. I'm going to be having two of them for sale, so if anybody would like to have one or two, you know, that's up to you, but I'm guessing you're probably just going to get one if you're willing to get it. So we're just assembling here at that first part. Not much is changing over here. Now we're going to be taking out the wheels from the Kuroshiba Special. Now, we are using these wheels specifically because they have extra larger diameters, essentially, and that allows you to have a higher top speed when you're racing in tuned class. So here, just cutting them out, making sure that everything is in order. When you're going to cut these out, just make sure that you cut them flush so that they're pretty even. In all four wheels. And here we're cutting 8 out, so we're going to be choosing the 4 best wheels out of the 8. I ended up having to actually open an additional kit, you know, from myself, just so that we could have an additional 4 more wheels to choose from. So this is the 6-spoke wheel, and we have it mounted on my wheel piercer, the 24.9. And we're going to be using a 2.1mm drill bit to drill into the hub to be able to get through to the other side. And the pin on the other side essentially keeps it from moving out of position. So here you just need to pop it in just a little bit, and that was it essentially. So once you'll see, it comes out quite nicely. There you go. So that is the wheel with the piercing. Now we're going to be doing this to all of the 8 wheels, and I added an additional 2 wheels just to get a much better sample size. This was one of the more time-consuming parts of the build, essentially looking for a good set of 4 wheels per car. Since we're building 2, we need 8 essentially. So I ended up having to get 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 wheels, and then out of those 20 wheels we picked out the best 8. So here are them pierced. Now these are the 72mm hollow drive shafts. We're going to be cleaning them first, making sure that they're dirt free when you're testing them. So here you go. This is a rag that's soaked in 70% alcohol just so that you could clean out the dirt. Now here we're just going to be using the Enomoto shaft tester to be able to check the straightness of each shaft. So here you're just looking to find a shaft that goes through all the time. So here at the step I'm just testing and making sure that none of the shafts actually catch. If it catches, essentially I eliminate it from the wheels that I'm going to be using for the shafts. And then these are pretty much the best shafts out of the 4 packages that I found. Basically 4 straight shafts for the 1.99 Enomoto shaft tester. So these are going to be separated for the 2 different cars. Now they're going to be sorted and then separated for the first car and the second car. Next step, we're going to be doing an in-between step. We need to start cleaning the bearings, so we have to put the HG round hole ball bearing set in the jar to be able to clean them off with Ronsonol, essentially lighter fluid, and the same thing needs to be done with the 520 bearing set with the MS shafts as well. So you take them out, you put them in the jar, you shake them up, and then you can see that the lighter fluid is going to start dissolving the grease that's inside of the bearings, because you don't really want too much grease in there. So there you go. And if you need to re-oil it, you can just put some oil on the bearings, and that's your choice. So here at this step, we are going to be working on installing the shafts. Now essentially these shafts are going to be meant for testing how well the wheels are balanced essentially. So there really isn't much that you can do when you are working on tuned class. You cannot modify the wheels, that's within the rules. But piercing at the DXN Provisions is fine. Basically that's just, makes it easier for when you are racing so that these wheels do not come off, and it just makes it easier for everybody, even the organizer. And here, this is an example of a shaft that is not in good shape. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. So there's a bit of a wobble. We're going to go ahead and take a closer look in a little bit later on one of the other wheels. This one, actually, that one seemed to be in good shape actually. So this one we're going to separate, and then we're essentially just categorizing it. So the next wheel the next wheel that we're going to show you is going to be not in good shape. This one's going to be an example of one of the wheels that we are not going to be using. So if you're going to go ahead and take a look, we're going to spin it, and then you could see a slight wobble on essentially 2 different axes. So up, left and right essentially, and then that wiggle is going to cause your car to lose a little bit of speed. Now essentially, once you are looking for the best wheels out of the set, it's going to be tough to find ones that are perfect. That's just the nature of tune class, especially since you cannot modify the wheels. That's just within the rules. So sadly, these wheels aren't going to be super perfect, but I picked out the 8 best out of the 20 that I looked through. So these wheels are still going to be pretty good in comparison to other, tuned class cars where they did not even bother checking how much wiggle their wheels have. So these are going to be quite good, as you'll see in the end much later. So these ones, basically I'm just categorizing them, essentially looking for the wheels that are straight or just out of the question that I cannot use. Especially on these ones, there's going to be a decent amount of them that are just like bad, so you have to take them out of the equation. So now we are just going to be stretching the low friction arch tires. These are going to be quite tough to do. And then here you just, to make sure that the nubs are gone, because that's gonna slow your car down a little bit, you just cut it, and then you're not really allowed to make any other changes other than just to cut the nubs off of the tires. Now this tool, this is a DXN Provisions. I'm not even sure what it is, but it's quite convenient that they have it so that I could use it for this build. So this allows you to stretch the tires, and that makes it easier for you to actually install them. It's essentially like pliers, but when you squeeze it, it opens up instead of clamping down, if that makes sense. And it's really quite fun and convenient to use. So yeah, there you go. I'm just stretching the tire so that I can install them over each wheel. And essentially do not over stretch it. Just, go through it bit by bit, and then it's going to take a little bit of force to, spread it. But there you go. It's going to, once you've spread it enough, just enough so that it goes a little bit, it's still going to be slightly smaller than the wheel, but that's really what you want, so that you don't want it to be bigger than the wheel once you've stretched it. Otherwise it would be too loose. So this is pretty much me readjusting and squeezing the tire onto the wheel. Part is 15349. We're going to be using the counter gear set, 3.5 to 1 gear ratio. We're essentially taking out the spur gear that's going to be on each axle. We're going to be using the 620s, not the 620s, but the HG ball bearing set, and we're going to be installing them, and we're going to start checking the fit of the wheel on the axles, essentially, and on the bumpers. So we're basically just taking the bearings out and then drying them off, spinning them, and then we are just checking to see how it fits. And then essentially what we're looking for is how the spur gear is sitting in the middle of that bumper, essentially. So now we are pushing it in just to see the position of where we would like to actually have the wheels. What you want to do is you want to center that shaft in between the two wheels so that they have a proportional amount of shaft protruding from both sides, so that it's balanced. When the wheels are balanced that way, the cornering improves quite a bit. So here, there you go. These are the wheels, and as you can see, they spin quite nicely, even though they are not quite as perfect as we'd like. If only we could trim these and we could have them basically balanced, then it would be much better. And here, these are just installing the rear wheels with the low friction tires. And the same thing we need to do with this one. We are just adjusting the position of the shaft so that there's an equal amount of shaft protruding on the left wheel and on the right wheel on this rear bumper. So now at this step, we are just going to start mounting the bumpers on the center chassis. Fairly easy to do, of course, pretty normal. We're just checking to see the fit, and then we are going to start installing the 520 bearing set with the counter gear. So Here we're just removing the counter gear shafts, and then we're going to start mounting the 520s on the bearings. Over here there's going to be a little bit of adjustment that I've done initially that felt like it was okay at the time, but I ended up changing my mind and actually making the mount the way that it's mounted a little bit tighter so that the bearings will actually mesh together a little bit better. So here, what we are doing is we are putting the small washers. These are, I don't know if these are included in the parts that I've listed. I ended up having to pull some parts, I think, from what I had. Essentially, these are going to be put on one side of the counter gears, essentially right there. That allows it to be slightly more stabilized in its axis so that it doesn't wiggle out of the way as much. I ended up changing my mind later, and we're going to see some fairly interesting washers that you could actually find in other places that you might not normally actually think of to be able to find washers. So here we have some of them mounted already, and there's a little bit of an improvement, but I was not quite happy with it later on, so I ended up changing the washers that I actually have on the chassis right here. I ended up changing the washers that were on that counter gear, and these we are just taking out the purple pinions that are on the actual Kuroshiba kits, since we're gonna be using two of them, and each of those kits have one. You can essentially take one from each kit and then putting them in there, but whatever extras I have I will also include in the kits. So this is going to be the Torque Tune 2 motor. These ones have not been broken in, so what you're gonna hear later is the sound of the transmission with the bearings, and the gears and the motor are still not broken in, but it's still gonna sound quite nice actually. So, and included in the purchase, I will end up actually having to break these motors in, and I've actually finished breaking them in as of editing right now. As I'm doing this voiceover, they are being broken in and they are gonna be finished, and they're going to be installed on the chassis. And here you go. We're just putting them in, and then we are now going to do another in-between step because we need to do this, before we start mounting the bumpers. These are the 70mm rollers. We're going to be putting them in that jar, and then the next jar is going to be filled up with the 90mm rollers. The four front HG, that's going to be included, and then the 8 5-spoke orange plastic rings, those are going to be included on the back, and those are going to be mounted on the back of the car. Those are going to be pretty good on the back because they just spin quite nicely, and we're going to be using that for the rear, of course. So next step is the mounting of the front bumper and the rear bumper roller assembly. You have the front multi-roller setting stay and the rear multi-roller setting stay. The front is going to be slightly different, and what I've done is that when I have it mounted, we're going to be adjusting the angle slightly with just a little bit of a trick that I've basically figured out for myself essentially. And you don't I'm not sure if people do this quite often, but especially for high speed, since the kit is included with that front bumper on MS, that MS bumper is 5 degrees, and that is too much for high speed. So what I like to do is I go 4 degrees, and if you put those washers underneath that front bumper like that, under those two front holes, that allows you to change the angle without really doing too much other than adding 2 more screws and then an additional 2 set of washers. So over here in the back, we just have the rear bumper mounted a little bit closer in. That allows you to mount the rollers slightly closer. So as you can see, there's still room for the 19mm rollers over there. And the same thing is going on with the front bumper right there. So the front bumper has the two center holes. We're going to be locking those down with the 2mm screws with washers, so that they, so that we just don't see them come off. And you can use longer screws, that's up to you, but I don't really think you need anything more than the 5mm. Basically, you just want to minimize the amount of weight that you're putting on the car. So there you go. If you actually look at the car in person, what you're going to see is that that's going to be setting at 4 degrees instead of the 5. Okay, so now we're going to start mounting the rollers for the front and rear bumper, and we're going to be using some spacers and bushings. You could get these from parts that actually have plastic rollers, and these are all going to be used as well, some spring washers as well. And what I like about those bushings for those plastic rollers is that they're going to be a little bit lighter than if you were using the aluminum spacers. These are going to give you a little bit of weight reduction, and that of course is going to translate to a little bit more cornering, acceleration as well. And that'll definitely help you on high speed. So that's what I like to use on my high-speed cars, specifically for this type of stuff. So now we are just sorting through all the parts that we're going to be using for the assembly of the front and rear bumpers. We've sorted out the 1.5mm spacers that we're going to be needing. Those are from the aluminum sets. You need 2 for each car, because you're going to need 8 of those 1.5mm spacers total. And then we have the HG rollers now installed. We're going to be using one of those underneath, a 1.5mm underneath that, and on top of the plate, this spring washer, and then the 1.5mm. And here we are going to be removing the nubs that include for mold for the plastic, when they're making the 17mm plastic ring rollers. And then at the end, you're going to see the way that it's mounted. So it's fairly simple. At the bottom is a 19 with the spacers that hold it in place with that copper bushing. And then you have the 1.5mm underneath that plate. And then on top of that plate, you have a spring washer and then a 1.5mm. And then 2 of those copper roller bushings right there. And then you have the top roller. And then you have the purple aluminum lock nut. So that's going to be the same assembly for the right front as well, except we're going to be using the red plastic ring roller because we're going to be splitting that assembly from for both cars, so that both cars have an even amount of colors. So one red and one orange, and then one red and one orange on the other car as well. So right here we are just looking at the HG rollers. Those are always quite good after you check them. So these basically it's quite simple. The front bumper, these are already set up so that they can clear the rainbow lane change. And just to clarify, this setup is designed for the rainbow lane change. It's not gonna stay down on a normal overpass lane change. It's not designed to do that at all. So if you're looking to get this car specifically for that type of tune class high-speed race, then this probably won't work well for you. It's not going to be designed for that. This is more of a top speed type of high-speed car for tune class. So here now we are installing the rear. We're going to be using the 219s on left side, both sides of course. So it's going to be the roller, 2 of those spacers, and then 1.5mm and then you get the spring washer, and then the 1.5 millimeter, and then one more of those spacers for the plastic rollers. And then of course we're just going to be mirroring that to both sides. Now the 19 millimeters in the back are actually quite good because they're very smooth. Essentially, they're one of the smoother rollers that have actually come out from Tamiya. These are quite old now. I think these are about like 2 years old parts, and these are actually quite pricey, but having them included in the cars is actually one of the more important things to do for high speed. So now we are going to be using some washers that came in some motors. Now on that particular set, I think that came from a Hyper Dash Pro motor, like this one. If you look at it, there's two different colors. There's like a black washer and then like an orange looking washer. And this one, I'm not sure which motor this from. This might be from a Light Dash. I don't think this is a mock, although I'm not 100% sure. I have not disassembled a mock dash yet for the mock dash Pro. But I think these are actually quite useful whenever you're doing any form of tuned class high speed stuff, because these are quite good for shimming the gears. Essentially, this allows you to stabilize them a little bit better than if you were using the steel washers and the small steel washer as well. So what's good with these is that when you put them on that shaft, they actually pretty much stay in place. They don't like wiggle out of place because they sit tight on the shaft. They're meant to be holding onto a motor shaft. So that inner what do you call it, hole is actually just the right size to hold onto the shaft. So it's not going to be wiggling out of place. Essentially, once you put it in there, it pretty much just rotates in the same place that it's supposed to, that you leave it in. So this one, that's the amount of space that was wiggling when I put the small washers in. So as you can see, there was still a little bit of wiggle in there. And the same thing goes for the back. So we are going to be taking those washers out, and then we are going to be installing a combination of those motor washers. So the washers that I installed here, essentially, if I recall correctly, are the brown looking ones and then the black. So at the back you need essentially two. So you need the black one and the brown looking one, and then you'll just have to look at the different thicknesses because it's not going to be the same for each chassis. So here on this one, what ended up happening was I installed the black bushing, not the black bushing, but the black washer with one of the orange ones that's slightly thin. So you could see it's a little bit closer. I ended up looking at this one a little bit more closely to see if there's a little bit more space. So what I ended up doing was adding an additional washer again. So this was now that was one of the black ones with one of the thin orange ones. So now if you look at it quite closely, there's a lot less wiggle. So that's what I was looking for. So that's on the rear. And then at the front, I ended up installing one of the thicker washers from the motor, and it's hard for me to tell which one was which one came from where. But after you, let's say you disassemble some Hyper Dash Pro, if you have them that have died, you can install that one. That one is a little bit thicker than the other two washers that were put on the rear. This one was pretty much just like a slot in perfect. The moment that I popped it in there, it was like, it felt like it was the exact distance that I needed to put in. And just to remind you again, not every chassis is going to have the exact same amount of room that allows you to put in these washers. This one was pretty much right. When you put that one washer in, it was just right. Now we're gonna go ahead and listen to what the cars sound like when they're running. So as you can see, it sounds quite nice for not much braking on the gears or on the bearings. After this video, I'd already finished doing the break-in as well, and I actually put some grease in instead as well, and it sounds actually much nicer than this now. So thank you again for watching this build video, and just to remind you guys, these are going to be listed for sale at dxnprovisions.com, and go ahead and check them out in the links in the video description down below, and maybe you can find some other stuff on the website as well that you might like to order. And yes, so just to remind you again, these cars are designed for the rainbow lane change. This isn't going to stay down on a normal overpass lane change. These are basically for full power and for um, full speed essentially. So yeah, these are gonna be quite nice if you guys like to race a high speed tune class. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, and share. And thanks for watching. Go race.